Hey there, how's it going? Yes, another game jam. If you're into game dev here on YouTube, or you've watched some of my other devlogs, you may know the YouTuber Miziziziz, for Aziz. He makes great videos, courses, streams, has a podcast, and comes up with some really interesting ways for people to make games. I absolutely love the 4 game devs jam off the same art kit series, and I was lucky enough to take part in it myself. So when Miz contacted me about a small experimental game jam, I was in without question. So here's the concept. It's called the Chain Letter Jam. Chain letters have existed in some form for a long time. Apparently since like 1935, dang. I remember them best from the late 90s, early 2000s, where there seemed to be a resurgence in them as society began to mass adopt email. You'd receive a message that would have an image or something like that, and it would say you had to forward this letter to X number of people in some amount of time or else you die. To this day, they're still just as annoying as ever. I still see them fairly frequently on Discord servers, although nowadays they seem to drop the you'll die part. Luckily, that's not a component of this jam. For this, the concept is that each link in the chain will be a game designer and game that will ever be expanding out. In the basic of terms, link 1 is the game that Miz made. They then post their game and nominate a number of other people. Those designers then need to make a roughly 1 minute long game that's inspired by the ones they were nominated by. This all has a bit of the old telephone game in it as well, where each step of the chain the product will mutate as different designers pull different elements that they will use as their inspiration. I absolutely love this idea, and I'm really honored to be among those in the second link of the chain. So here's the game I was sent. To get started, I checked it out and broke it down live on my Twitch stream to see what I had to work with as our quote-unquote theme, I guess is how you'd call it. Wordman saves the day. We get a quick cutscene and the story that Dr. Letters is going to destroy the world and Wordman cannot let that happen. We play as Wordman and must evade the bullet hell of letters to survive. You can left-click on the letters to try and create words. When you have a word made, you can right-click to deal damage based on the length of that word to Dr. Letters. But you have to be fast, because if your letters hit the wall, your word is now messed up and you can't use it anymore. And like a standard boss fight, when you've dealt enough damage and drained their health down to 0, you win. It's super cute. You could win with doing 2 and 3 letter words, but it's really fun to see how long of a word you can make. Also, as you can see, it lets you show how mature you are. How do I take this as a base and make something that's similar, but also my own? I began by writing out all the core elements that I wanted to consider. I then identified what elements I wanted to keep and what I was going to change to make my interpretation. I start off by mixing it up quite a bit by switching from a top-down game perspective and moving it over into a platformer. I also pretty early on decided that I wasn't going to have a giant word list and a parser where the player would be able to make any word that they wanted, mostly because I didn't really know how to do that very well, and with the platforming changing the way you move, I think it'll just be too limiting for the player to try to be able to make it to different areas of the screen to find all the letters they need. Miz had been on one of my streams a few weeks earlier and gave the suggestion of everything bounces as a theme for one of my 3-hour challenges. I thought making the player bounce around to collect and dodge the letters could be fun, and it would be a small nod to the person that nominated me, so that was pretty cool too. So it's time to get to it. As always, I started with an orange box that represents the player. I made it bounce whenever it hit the ground, set up some basic bullets that fire in from the left and right of the screen. These will be the letters eventually. And then to add a little more control to the player's movement, I gave them a parachute that they could activate when they're falling. This allows for some pretty precise movement, even though you can never stop bouncing, so you never actually get to sit still. As I just mentioned, instead of letting the player be able to make any word, I give the player a target word that they're going to need to spell. This is one of those times where there was something that I thought would be pretty simple, like just getting the letters to go across the screen, that actually turned out to need a lot of thought. Getting that letter distribution to feel right was a pretty good challenge, and I ended up tweaking it throughout the entirety of development. There ended up being a pretty delicate balance of the player not having the letter they needed right away so the game didn't go too fast, but not making them wait too long to the point where it got annoying. I was tweaking and adjusting all of this stuff throughout the entirety of development, but because we're talking about it here, just to keep it all coherent, in the end, I settled on having only the letters from the current word spawn. And on top of that, to make sure that the player still wasn't waiting too long for any particular letter, the current letter that's needed is 4 times more likely to spawn to make sure that there isn't excess waiting. I built up a fairly easy system for reading the words. I just set up an array that can take 3, 4, or 5 letter words. Because the word choice is random, I did put in a safeguard to check if the new word is the same as the last word. If it is, it will then use a special word that will only get picked in this exact situation. So with the system set up, I threw in a few test words. Again, you can see how mature I am. I moved back to the actual gameplay. The ground was feeling a bit boring at this point. I wasn't sure if I wanted it to be a full solid layer where the player could bounce anywhere. I personally liked having a bunch of smaller platforms that you had to aim for, but I did worry that this would end up being too difficult. It's really important to keep in mind, especially with game jam games, that we are always going to be better at our own games than the players will be. For a game like this, I'm not expecting the players to get up to a ridiculous skill level, so I don't want to force them to have to play something that's too hard. So my usual rule of thumb is that if I find something challenging and fun, I make it easier. Then when I think it's easy, I make it easier, and then that's about right. This, of course, isn't a hard rule, it's just a heuristic I've developed. So instead of going for too many small platforms, I decided to scale the difficulty and start the player with one large floor. Then each time they complete a word, the floor will change, making a couple more gaps that they could fall into, hopefully allowing the player to ease into the difficult aspects of the terrain a little more easily. Also, falling in a pit just deals 1 damage and respawns you at the center of the screen. So overall, the penalty for not landing on the platform and falling is pretty light. According to the loose rules, the games made for the jam should be around a minute of playtime, so there really isn't much more to do mechanically. Granted, I was tweaking all the elements that I've just been talking about throughout this whole process, but I think this is a pretty good core game loop for about a minute. Now, I need to make this thing not look so freaking boring. I wanted to make my game to be as close to the source game as I could, with the exception of my mechanical changes. This is just because I really wanted to see how the game evolved if I didn't stray too far from the path. The source game has a 4-color palette, so I decided to keep that as a restriction, and I grabbed the lava level palette made by Polyforge from lowspec.com. The game also used art assets from Kenny, who is absolutely amazing. But I tend to like to make my own art as much as I can, so I made my renditions for the characters of Wordman and Dr. Letters, as well as everything else. I was working on these parts live, so I was able to pool my Twitch chat for fighty, actiony type words to help fill out and replace my bad placeholder words. Thank you to everyone that was there and gave suggestions. It's really nice to have other input for this sort of thing. There's a lot of stuff that I wouldn't have thought of. In the original game, Dr. Letters is standing in the center of the screen shooting letters out in all directions. But I wasn't quite sure how that was going to work in a side-on perspective. I tried it anyway, shrinking Dr. Letters down and pushing them into the back to make it appear like they're further away. Then I had him spawn blank letter pieces and shoot them out to the sides. This has absolutely no mechanical impact on the game, but in the end it looked really cool and gave the impression that the letters were being spawned in the background, going off of the side of the screen and then returning in the foreground. To tie it in even further, when you complete a word, it becomes an attack that shoots from the HUD towards Dr. Letter to deal damage when it hits. I finished polishing everything up, adding more juice, art, menus, instructions, cutscenes, yada yada yada. You know, all the unfun parts of finishing a game. I considered changing the story up a bit, but I opted to go for the same one that was already there. Again, I was trying to keep this game as close as I could, aside from the small mechanical gameplay changes that I made. That way we could see how the game evolved down the line. For my final day of working on the game, I posted a private dev build to my Twitch chat to have them playtest and help me out with any issues that they found. I got great feedback that helped me clean up a couple of elements, add some more indicators so that things were clear, as well as letting me know that having to complete 5 words was actually kinda hard. This is that bias I was talking about earlier. I was just better at the game, so 5 words seemed to make sense. The fix was pretty simple. I just added 2 game modes. Hard mode is what I was already working with. You have to complete 5 words to win. Then I made a normal mode that's exactly the same, but only requires 3 words to complete. It's a simple switch that I think makes the game much more enjoyable for a wider variety of players. And at the end of the jam, this is Word Bounce. I'm really happy with how it all came together. I feel it still retains the core concepts of the original game, but it's definitely more me. Whether you think that's a good thing or not is up to you. I posted the game up to my itch page and I nominated a few more people. At this point, it's been a little over a month and there are more and more games being made all the time. In some places, the links of the chains have broken as some people are not able to finish a game or timing has been an issue, but that's pretty much to be expected in something like this. This is all just meant to be for fun, and I really hope that it keeps growing and expanding. I would love to come back to this in a year and see how many games have been made and how different the new games are compared to the originals. And people are already making some amazing things. I'm showing several games on screen now, and I'll have links to the games and the creators in the description below. Also, make sure to check out the hashtag ChainletterJam on Twitter to see even more. Seriously, check them out, play the games, follow the creators, let's keep this community growing as much as we can. This was a super fun idea. And thanks again to Miziziziz for nominating me to help kick this whole thing off. I love the concept and everything about it, and I can't wait to see where it goes. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'd like to give an extra special shout out to my amazing Patreon supporters, especially Abishan, Claude13, Daniel Martin, David Scott, Huntrump, Nightfall, Kevin Halgau, Kirby, Kormai, Liam Sorta, MLK, Motzi Makes, Nazar Salim, Salty Pretzel, Scott Hansen, Soapy Gnome, and Straight Up Gruntle. You're all awesome people, and I cannot thank you enough for your support. If you would like to be part of the game making process, please come say hi over at twitch.tv/Vimlark, or you can always message me on Twitter or join the Discord with a lot of other really cool people. I hope you're all healthy and safe wherever you are, and I will talk with you next time. Have a good one. Later.